Welcome to the Fun Astrology Podcast for Saturday, November 22nd, a date that our country should never forget, back in 1963 in Daley Plaza in Dallas, Texas. This is the free weekly newsletter that's published every weekend on MMAcycles.com from the Merriman Market Analyst team here of late as we've been working through the 2026 forecast book. I'm Thomas Miller. Thanks for joining us here today. This week's newsletter is written by Puyan Zalfagarnia as the Merriman Analyst team has been wrapping up the Forecast 2026 book, and we appreciate Puyan for stepping in this week. I think things will get back to normal with Ray back next weekend on the newsletters. All right, here we go. Puyan this week. First of all, a quote from the Wall Street Journal from Friday's journal referencing Thursday's market action. The ProShares Ultra Pro Short QQQ Fund, an ETF that magnifies bearish bets on the NASDAQ and is under the symbol SQQQ, recorded more than $12 billion of inflows on Thursday, the largest daily haul on record, according to FactSet and Dow Jones market data going back to 2010. This fund provides leveraged exposure to tech stocks falling. For example, if the NASDAQ falls 1%, the SQQQ might rise about 3%, end quote. Now, this week's review section from Puyan. This past week, the cosmic spotlight was on the subterranean undercurrents of the financial world, with the sun in Scorpio and the moon joining it there for a lunation. The moon doesn't like Scorpio, losing dignity in the sign of its fall. This impacts human emotions, and we saw this in the form of a sharp sell-off across the markets. The new moon in Scorpio pulled back the curtain on a deeper hidden problem: mounting debt, hidden imbalances in the tech credit complex, sovereign bonds under pressure, and the UK High Court ruling against BHP, the world's largest mining company, for Brazil's 2015 dam disaster. But the grand trine between the Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn-Neptune helped elevate last week's mood, inviting us to consider bold visions of growth, renewal, and peace. A detailed U.S. peace plan was shared with Ukraine as Moscow signaled its willingness for talks. The week ended as the Sun-Uranus opposition jolted markets and a magnitude 5.5 earthquake hit Bangladesh. All three U.S. stock markets closed down this week, and all within the orb of a primary cycle and starting to show signs of bullish oscillator divergence. Has the low formed? In the October overview section of the MMA Cycles Plus report, Puyan wrote, quote, "As the sun enters Scorpio later in the month, bullish momentum in equities and precious metals may wane. Scorpio season often coincides with rising volatility, a sharper focus on debt, credit, and hidden risks, and an uptick in scandals or crises that unsettle investor psychology. Suspicion, fear, and anxiety tend to peak here, making markets more reactive and prone to sudden reversals." End quote. Friday was the last day of this transit, as the sun entered the more optimistic and exuberant sign of Sagittarius. It is possible we may have just seen the tech-heavy NASDAQ and the crypto markets form their respective primary cycle troughs, as the sun opposed Uranus, the planet that rules over these assets. We have seen the steepest decline in most markets since the low that formed in April. This was reflected globally, with all indices dropping off their respective all-time highs as the sun transited Scorpio. Japan's Nikkei fell 8.4% in 3 weeks. The UK's FTSE fell 5.1% in 1 week. The German DAX fell 7.4% in 6 weeks, and the Australian ASX 200 fell 7.8% over 4 weeks. We may yet see bullish intermarket divergence once the momentum shifts. We saw a similar picture across the BRICS economies, with China's SSE index dropping 4.9% in a week. Brazil's Bovespa index dropped 3.1% over a week, and South Africa's JSE 7% over a week. Argentina's Merval 13.4% over 2 weeks. The only outlier was India's Nifty, which was up for the week and testing its all-time high of September 2024. The precious metals were undecided given the mixed signals under Mercury retrograde. Bitcoin and Ethereum remain within a bearish pattern, putting in new lows in the time band for a primary cycle trough. Both assets have very likely formed their respective four-year crests, which makes me nervous about the stock markets. Bear in mind that Bitcoin formed its four-year crest in November of 2021, the same month that the Nasdaq formed its 2- or 3-year crest. Both assets formed a new all-time high in October of 2025. This is an important correlation worth tracking closely. And now this week's short-term geocosmics, another article from Friday's Wall Street Journal. Japan's cabinet has approved $135 billion of stimulus to help households cope with rising living costs and boost economic growth, firing off the first fiscal salvo under new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. The Takaichi administration on Friday signed off on the package totaling 21.3 trillion yen, the equivalent of $135 billion, end quote. Now, Puyan's thoughts for the short-term geocosmics. With the grand trine and water signs, news of the Japanese stimulus was the type of event I was anticipating this week. With all the planets in water signs, the Sun-Uranus opposition at the end of the week was always going to bring about sudden and unexpected news concerning natural disasters, crashes, or rash decisions. We saw this manifest as Storm Claudia battered Europe. The storm caused days of heavy rain and flooding, Jupiter-Neptune, in Portugal and neighboring Spain, and later inundated southeastern Wales. Operation Southern Spear was launched against narco-terrorists. The operation, led by the Joint Task Force Southern Spear, Trine, deployed the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, Jupiter-Neptune, and aims to interdict drug smuggling vessels, Neptune. The UAE, the United Arab Emirates, ordered 65 Boeing 777 jets valued at $38 billion. Both the large jets and the value involved resonant traits of Jupiter. The COP30 climate summit in Brazil had a fire disruption. The summit was a great manifestation of the cooperation represented within the Grand Trine, yet fire-causing disruption is a manifestation of the Sun-Uranus opposition. There was an Indian fighter jet crash at the Dubai Air Show. The Sun-Uranus opposition often results in violent accidents. And Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, seized a tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. This is the Sun-Uranus opposition rash event occurring in international waters, the water sign Trine. Over the coming week, as the Sun leaves the Grand Trine, it will pass the torch to Venus, the planet of peace and prosperity, to reignite the trine with Jupiter and Saturn-Neptune. This bodes well for potential peace talks and cooperation over the Russia-Ukraine war. We have two powerful geocosmic signatures coming up: Saturn's direct station on November 27th and the Venus-Uranus opposition November 29th. We may see a case of intermarket bullish divergence, with some markets forming their troughs last week and others forming them this week. This could be a great setup for buying the dip. As this is published, the Sun has just left Scorpio's darker terrain, and a sense of renewed optimism seems to be breaking through in the markets, in geopolitics, and in the atmosphere itself. Saad's Bustan, the orchard, captures this turning from shadow to light, the point that we at MMA pride ourselves on, quoting, "When every remedy and clear plan has failed, the wise man rose in humility and said, 'O Lord, by your grace, my hope grows strong, that what is difficult may become easy. Do not close the door of hope, my friend, for fortune often arrives suddenly from that very place. This anxious state will not remain forever. In a single moment, the throne of destiny can change. The dark night will, in the end, become day. No state of sorrow or suffering lasts forever." End quote. And that is this week's newsletter. Thank you so much for your time this week. Have a great rest of the weekend. I'll see you back on Fun Astrology on Monday. So go out there and make it a great weekend. We have a big week ahead.